Lab Brookside. And we are glad to have him with us. We want to make this interactive, so grab a seat, guys. Grab a seat. So
Yeah, if you don't sit down, it'll make me nervous.
and if we need to, we need to there. All right.
I was just making sure it would pop up on the screen, right? So, I was hoping that we would be playing it too. So I know I talked to my dad on Sunday, and he's like, "I'm not looking at the calendar. I'm not looking at the calendar." So that's kind of the theme in our area. So in our area, you go from we planted the end of like the 29th and 30th of April, and it was really not fit at that time. And it's like now we wish we would have like pushed it the 29th and 30th of April because we haven't been back in the field since. And actually, I don't know if it's fit now either. So it is what it is. I actually grew up. If everybody knows where the lab is, about 2.5 hours from here in New Greene, Ohio. I actually grew up just 30 minutes from there. We had a dairy farm. We had hogs, some chicken. You know, my grandmother raised chickens for eggs, so I got the full experience growing up living on the farm. So today I'm really going to focus on. I've given this talk several times, trying to just get an overview of carbon. So I hope to make this interactive. Like if you have questions, just stop and have a discussion. I guess that I've given this several times over the past few months, and some of it might be more relevant here today than other parts of it. And if it's not, I'll probably glaze over it. But if you got a question on something you see, we'll gladly stop and spend a little time there. So I just want to introduce Danny and his group are part of Amplify, which is our consultant network for our organization. And these are the types of things that we really focus on a lot. We're focusing a lot on data. And our whole thing is we want to bring opportunity to everybody. We're not in business to. We're in business to make money because everybody's in business to make money, but we're in business to help people grow. That's really the first and foremost thing. And that includes not only Danny and his group, but also the farmers. And so it's really near and dear to me because I grew up on the farm. So I still watch my dad, who's like, he's turned 68 this year, who's still doing it. And he's waiting on me to like take over. And of course, I said, I need like 10 more years. So you gotta like hang on. And my uncle, who he farms with, they kind of, they farm about 800 or 900 acres together. And my uncle's like 74. So I don't, 10 more years is probably a lot to ask, but
no, it's not.
it's not. That's good because I need 10 more. I need 10 more years. My wife says we need 10 more years. So
my wife said never.
So we're real big on not only the mission and vision, but the core values too. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but really the last one is the most important one that I think to me is if you ever heard that 1 + 1 = 3, that's kind of that's what we hope to be with our consultant network and the lab. And we partner a lot with growers too. We do a lot of research. We do peer groups with growers. We're trying to help people grow and get better. So what we want is a community alive with depth and effective with a feeling of family, create trusted relationships, others develop centers and partners. And so that's what we're about, helping people grow and get better. And I said, it's not always necessarily in your farming operation. It could be in friendships or hobbies or marriage or whatever it is. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the whole carbon thing. So why is this? Why are we even talking about carbon? This is the interactive part. Why do you even care? Besides that, you might be able to get paid for it.
Carbon gets put in the atmosphere from fossil fuels and just doing stuff, doing things.
Human activities, right? Or anthropogenic activities. And so again, if you go back, and I haven't even updated these. I captured these when I was talking on this in January. So I was like in December. If you go today, there's a whole list of headlines. So this year set to be the hottest ever on record. 2 million species facing extinction. Climate inaction puts lives on the line. We're on the verge of 5 catastrophic tipping points. Heat-related mortality in Europe. extreme weather, and it is it's what you just talked about. So if you can go back to like 1960 and you can track this, right? You can track the CO2 in the atmosphere, the amount of carbon. And this was measured at the Mauna Loa Observatory, so you can go look this up yourself. It's not secret or anything. It's on the NOAA website. You can plot this out from 1960 on. You can see this gradual increase in carbon in the atmosphere. Why does the red line go up? You see that, so these are the actual measurements, the red line, and then the black line is the average for the years. Why does the red line go up and down?
Well,
Make it think.
seasonal and the
Yes,
earth
yeah,
position.
Oh,
seasonal,
that's measured at one place.
yeah, it's seasonal. So what is the highest point? Think of the northern and southern hemisphere. What has the largest landmass? Okay, so what time is the high point where there's a ton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? And what's not happening?
During the summer or during the winter with no.
No growth.
Oh, okay.
No growth in the winter time. So most of the land mass on Earth is on the northern hemisphere. This is the winter time is your highest point here. And the summertime is actually the lowest because you have plants like what we're doing now, put all the crops in the ground, which is sucking up the CO2. So I like to point that out because it's just kind of a cool thing that you can actually measure that in the atmosphere when plants are growing.
There
So
was a lot of. I'm sure you're looking at years and years ago, but. There was a lot of discussion at one point in time about the photoplankton in the ocean being a greater reservoir of absorbing CO2 than the plants on the
you'll
land.
see in a little bit that there's actually more CO2 stored in the ocean than anywhere else in the world. The problem of it is if you start putting more CO2 in the oceans, what do you start affecting in the ocean? The acidity of the ocean, which then affects what?
Life in
The life in the ocean, most specifically reef life. I mean, your coral reefs. If you lose your coral reefs, now you're affecting. That's where most of the fish live, is around the coral reefs, and so you're affecting them. So you got to be careful with the oceans and putting too much CO2 in the oceans. That's a whole chemistry thing. Actually, my background is in chemistry, so I really enjoy discussing that. But the argument that's always been is climate change real, right? Because you can go back and you can look at this and say, well, you're not showing anything that's before 1960, and this is just a normal cycle of Earth. And then, yeah, you can absolutely argue that because you can go to this slide and you can actually see it. We do have normal cycles of the Earth. We have high CO2, we have low CO2, we have high CO2, we have low CO2. If you go back through time, I mean, this goes back to ice cores back to 650,000 years ago. Now, you can make the argument, how good is the science to test back that far and carbon? Let's pretend it's good science. We'll just for argument's sake, let's pretend it is good science, because it is to a point. But again, you get back 650,000 years, I would argue we probably can't estimate back that far. The technology is just not that good. And that's a whole other discussion. So, but let's say we are good back to 250,000. You can see we have natural cycles. What is not natural about time zero? It's significantly higher than what we've seen in the past, right? You notice, yeah, the Earth does have high CO2, low CO2, high CO2, low CO2. But what is the height like on all those peaks? Pretty similar, right? We've not experienced, according to what history that we have not experienced a level that we're at today. And that's the concern. That's what has all the scientists freaking out and worried. And then what goes along with that, so if you go back to the 1960 graph that's going like this, look at the temperature graph. 1850. You know, you see you're kind of in, you can see some fluctuations. We're hot, we're cool, we're hot, we're cool, we're hot. From 1950 on, what happens? We're hot, we're hot, we're hot, we're hot, we're hot. What's that? Has anybody watched the weather? I mean, besides your local weather, which is the most important right now, has everybody seen the temperature in Miami this week? The heat indices are already like 115 degrees. And it's May. That was record setting already. Texas is having the same issue this week. So there clearly is something different that happened, you know, tens of thousands of years ago. It's not quite the same. And you mentioned it's, well, why? So look at that. So now let's put the CO2 graph plus the temperature graph. Plus here's our fossil fuel usage. Look familiar? Look, the trend looks very similar, right? It's 1850 and there's all of a sudden 1950. Look what happened. Yeah, we had, notice the temperature graph, the one before was slowly kind of doing, that's what happened in 1950. We're using all kinds of fossil fuels. And you go back to the temperature, what happened at 1950, temperature started going up. So it's that relationship that we're talking about. And it's really the, you know, the coal, you look at the coal usage, the oil usage is tremendous from basically 1950 on. That's what's really from the coal, the oil and gas.
Do you have an overlay of population increase in the world to go with that?
And not on this, no, not on this.
But it pretty much mimics what we're looking
Right,
at.
you have more people, you have more usable resources. But population is not going to increase forever. I don't know.
Well.
You need to read a book. If you think it is, you need to go read. If you need it, there's a book that actually says if the United States might be okay, but most of the world, if you look at the average age, so we're going to get to another discussion because of that. You look at the average age of the people in Japan, or China's actually in big trouble. The end of the world is, I forget what the name of the book is. Everybody, this always comes up in conversation. The end of the world is something, and I don't remember what it is. It's a fantastic read, but it's about population collapse. And the United States is one of the few countries, the largest population in the United States was who? When was the last large population?
The end of the world is just the beginning.
The end of the world is just the beginning. That's the book. When was the last population?
Millennium.
Before the millennials. And what do the baby boomers have? Who do they have?
Well, right now,
The millennials.
That's what they got, yeah.
So the baby boomers increase their population by having the millennials. If the millennials have babies, like the baby boomers did, the United States will actually be okay. We won't have population collapse. We bought ourselves some time. If the millennials don't have babies, we're going to see what happens, what China and all these other countries experience, which is significant decline in their population. When you have significant decline in the population, now you have, you know, what's China? They supply basically everything, right? You go to the store and everything says made in China.
Yeah.
Well, guess what we're not going to have? You know, you're not going to be able to get certain products. So it's going to be become more and more difficult. So that's what's actually globally what's going to happen. So everybody talks about feeding the world. That's actually probably not going to be a concern. It's going to be like, we actually probably need to have more babies.
With the guy that wrote that book, Peter Zion, I think you say his name, he not to open another can of worms, but he argues that that's actually the same issue that Russia is facing.
Yep.
He believes that's partially why they're doing what they're doing in Ukraine, is because they see this as kind of their last ditch, like pull the trigger now.
There's only a handful of countries in the world that actually will probably be okay population wise, and the US is one of them. And the other was like Mexico, because they just have lots of babies, they have lots of kids. But if at the point in time, it's interesting, that book talks about too, when the US becomes, what happened after World War II with the US? What do we become?
So we became the superpower.
We became the world cop.
Right, yeah.
Right? Because if what's happening in the Middle East right now, if we're not involved in the Middle East, what do you think is going to happen in the Middle East, right? That's going to be a complete total cluster. If we weren't kind of giving Ukraine some weapons right now and kind of holding them back, what's Russia going to do? They're just going to mow through. So when we become disinterested, our leadership becomes disinterested in the world, you're not going to see global trade like you do today. And actually, because of our location in some of the countries in South America, we actually can get everything that we need just in our North Central and South America part of the world. But the rest of the world become a complete chaos if that happens, because I mean, there's only 3 countries that have navies that can project power: US, Japan, and Great Britain. Japan and Great Britain aren't the size of the US Navy. So when we decide not to care anymore, it's gonna change the world as we know it. And it's a kind of interesting philosophy, because I often say, it's like, why do we care about all these things? Because we didn't before. So,
How long has that theory been around?
the population collapse,
Population decline.
I think that's been discussed since about like early 2000s.
There was a fellow that went to our church that he was born in Great Britain and they moved him into the center of the island during during World War II and B2 and all that done. And he ended up in Africa. And then, he worked for Rolls Royce and then he ended up getting out of there when they had their revolution and he came to the United States for the company. But anyway, he said that a lot of that's going on in Europe now, that they don't have enough children to replace their own workers, and he told me that years and years.
So
ago.
Europe is ahead of
And
schedule.
France was one.
Yeah, Japan and Europe is ahead of China and Russia. And then China and Russia are kind of like next on the list. And then if we're not careful, we're gonna be next on the list. So if you got millennial children, encourage them. The problem with it is kids cost
Well, it's like a responsibility.
a lot of money.
I'm Catholic.
He's open to a large family. Anyways, and if you like to listen to books, or if you're interested, it is a really interesting book to read, and I think there's some good points made, and if you really look at the world today, you can kind of see, those things happening. So, back to the carbon. Greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide is one we talk about the most. The methane and nitrous oxide are also concerned. So methane is actually 28 times more powerful than CO2 of traffic heat in the atmosphere. And nitrous oxide is 205 times more powerful than. And why do we care? Why do we even bring up methane and nitrous oxide?
Well, nitrous oxide is primarily a product of combustion. And it's incomplete combustion. So that.
That's one reason. Why do we care in this room about nitrous oxide?
Nitrogen fertility.
Denitrification. So when you're putting nitrogen out and you get a 5-inch rain and the soil goes anaerobic, what do you think is happening?
Yeah.
It's supposed to go into gas, that's just like an incomplete combustion from it. That happens sometimes too with the microorganisms. They're leaky and they don't convert all that nitrogen fertilizer to nitrogen gas, which doesn't harm the atmosphere. They produce nitrous oxide sometimes too, and it's 265 times more worse than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's why we really are more concerned with nitrous oxide. The other thing is methane too, cow burps. It's not going to stop cow burps, and I like eating hamburgers, so landfills. If you're heating, and we'll get to the map here in a little bit, but if all of a sudden you're warming Canada and you're warming parts of Siberia and stuff like that, what are those? What is stored in a lot of that's all bog land, and that's all got a lot of trapped methane. It's all frozen tundra. When you melt that, guess what happens? Which there goes methane into the atmosphere. So the sources, like I said, carbon dioxide, mainly crude oil, fossil fuels, methane, natural gas, landfills is actually a big one for methane, more than what you think. So you see the stacks coming out of the landfills, that's actually they're blowing out methane. Produced by the microorganisms, those landfills. For nitrous oxide, manufacturing cars, you mentioned cars, the agricultural soil is actually listed on that list as well too. So how do you manage your soils? Are you putting a nitrogen stabilizer down? Things of that nature. You look at the sources of greenhouse gases, 28% from transportation, 28% from electricity, 22% from industry, and then 9% is actually from agriculture. It's interesting that I always find it interesting that agriculture, like I feel like farmers are pressured to do more on sustainability than anybody else, but you look at like the contributors, it's like, well, it's like 80% of it's coming from, industry, electricity, and transportation. Anyways, I just find that interesting. So what we're trying to do is we have this historical emissions. This is from a paper that was published in 2017. And here's the actual number from 2015. We're trying to get to this point of negative emissions because we're trying to keep the Earth from warming past 2 degrees C, which is basically 5 degrees Fahrenheit. We want to stop it. And what the theory is if you can get to out here like 2030, because you see, what do you hear? A lot of companies say by 2030 we want to do what? Or carbon neutral. That's why. If we can be carbon neutral, we can find ways to offset what we're doing or produce or release less carbon. We can get into this trend to get into negative emissions. Are we going to cool the Earth by doing that? No, but we're going to hold steady where we're at today. And what we're going to need is eventually we're going to need some really, really good technology if we're going to cool the Earth to suck more CO2 out of the atmosphere than what we produce. So where is this coming from? I mean, you just Google this sometime if you got time. Microsoft wants to address a plan to remove carbon by 2030. General Mills commits to 100% renewable energy by 2030. IKEA pledges to zero out emissions from home. I mean, everybody's got something. It seems like some sort of pledge. And what year is a lot of it talking about 2030? There's Walmart's 2040, Apple's 2030. Amazon commits to make all the shipments with net zero carbon emissions. So all these big companies are doing this. Why? Do they care about the atmosphere?
They're saying business.
Right, you're exactly right. We're and it's the consumer. And what consumers are driving this? Where are they located? Are they located right here in this room? Yeah. That's it. The West Coast, the East Coast. It's not in the heartland of America. It's driven by the consumers who are located in. Because it was interesting. I was listening to, there was an argument about, it was an NBA playoffs. I hate the NBA, but I listen to sports talk radio, and they were talking about the amount of people. So it's like 2/3 of the population in the United States lives east of the Mississippi River. And if you really think about that, most of that is Boston, New York, all down that East Coast. If you really start looking at the cities, it's not in Indianapolis, because they're arguing like the NBA doesn't want Indianapolis to make it to Indiana to make it to the NBA finals because there's no people here to watch. Nobody cares if Indiana makes it. So I don't watch it yet, so I think it's bad.
It's
Older paid babies, that's what So I was talking about carbon and the release of carbon to the atmosphere. So let's talk about numbers. Because it's important that you get to numbers to start to understand like what we're dealing with, the magnitude of what we're dealing with. So usually you see it things measured in petagrams, which is 10 to the 15 grams, which is actually equivalent to a gigaton. So how much is a gigaton? It's a billion metric. It's 2.2 trillion pounds is a gigaton. 2.2 trillion pounds. You can't even count to a trillion in your lifetime. You're not even alive a trillion seconds. If you do the math, you're not even almost Earth a trillion seconds. You can't even count this in your lifetime. It's 10,000 fully loaded US aircraft carriers is 1 gigaton. And what we're talking about is we're releasing, as of 2022, we're releasing 36.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. Times 10,000 US aircraft carriers. That's what 36,000 US aircraft carriers worth of carbon every year. That is a ton. I mean, that's hard to fathom wrapping. There's not even 36,000 aircraft carriers on Earth. So that's what's coming from fossil fuels. And we got about 5,000 gigatons of carbon stored in fossil fuels. You mentioned oceans, there's 38,000 gigatons of oceans. Some of that goes, they look at carbonate rocks, there's 75 million gigatons of carbon stored in carbonate rock. So limestone. Primarily you think about Earth has a lot of limestone rock on it and stuff. So there's 75 million there. But what we're after is this part right here. So there's 790 gigatons in the atmosphere, 620 in vegetation. But what we're interested in is these transitions. You see kind of what's given off, so vegetation, every year, so when we're growing our crop, we're sucking out atmosphere, we're sitting about 60 gigatons of the soil. The soil stores about 3,000 to 4,000 gigatons. But the soil, depending on what we're doing with it, is giving off 62 gigatons. So it's right now, this is again, as the practices at this time, this was in 2017, we're giving off more than actually what we're storing every year. So there's an opportunity in soil, and that's why people start talking about carbon markets, because there is an opportunity there that we're removing, we're not putting back enough, we're actually removing more than what we're putting back every year. So there is an opportunity. Can we make this equal? Can we make this, maybe a little bit more positive than what's coming in? Vegetation, you see you got about 110 gigatons worth of vegetation every year with 50 going back to the atmosphere. Because as that residue breaks down, you are going to lose some back to the atmosphere. So that's really what the global carbon cycle looks like. And that's why we're after soil, because that's the easiest thing that we can do right now to store some carbon, take some carbon out of the atmosphere. And so
you get all the attention.
that's
When you ask that question, when you have the graph up, it was like 9 or 10%.
because you're also the easiest way that we can store carbon right now, because we don't have the technology available and that's cost effective enough to do it any other way. This is the most cost effective way, easiest, this is the easy button right now for us to store carbon into the, remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so we're doing this by the old, remember, if you can not go way back to probably junior high, I remember learning this in like 7th grade biology. Okay, so what is photosynthesis? What are we doing with photosynthesis? Anybody remember the equation? CO2 plus water using energy, sunlight, equals what? Sugar, glucose. That's a basic building block of life is glucose. Yeah. So 6 waters plus 6 CO2s plus sunlight gives you glucose, essentially. And so that's what we're doing. And then you have roots and you have plant mass and everything else, and eventually the microbes and everything in the soil, that's how you store carbon. So my argument always is, you can take a look at where carbon is stored in our soils, right? I find this really interesting as a soil scientist. So we're not storing carbon here. Why? What is that? So there it is. We're not storing much carbon here. I mean, it didn't rain there either. It's pretty much desert. We're not storing carbon here. That's their Gobi Desert. These people are always angry because it doesn't rain. That's why I think it really is, because it doesn't rain.
They're shipping the carbon out.
Yeah, they're mining it, shipping it back out. It's dry here, right? So where's our opportunities to store carbon? It's too cold here to farm or do anything. But where's our opportunities to store carbon? When you're starting to look where we're sitting today. Right now, these people don't give a crap because they're at this war right there. So, like, they're just in survival mode, this part of the US. And that's too cold. But again, you're just really limited. So this is why it's a big deal in the US, because right now, I mean, you have some parts maybe of South America but they're more interested in tearing down trees and creating more farmland than they're actually, storing carbon in soils. So you guys here in the Midwest are probably the biggest opportunity to try to put some carbon back in the soil. And what's interesting, if you now let's think about this picture and go to this graph. So what is the soil's potential? Well, I said we leak, we're giving off 62 gigatons and we're only putting 60 back in, right? So the research is saying, okay, if we just do crop land, set aside, some disturbed land, we can maybe get to 2 gigatons that we're talking about. If we add in some grassland, really work on agroforestry and, maybe get some peat bulb restoration, some peat moss restoration, we might be able to push that 4. If we include all that above and some frontier technologies, the frontier technologies include biochar, deployment of perennial grain crops, adoption of annual crops that have been bred to produce deeper and larger root systems. We might be able to push that between 6 and 8 gigatons. How much are we releasing every year? That was in 2022, 36 gigatons. we're not really making a dent. And we're just trying to hold it steady. So what I'm trying to show you, and this is global, right? This is the global potential. And what did I tell you was happening on this map? Is everybody participating in this globally? No, because a lot of these people like are just trying to feed their families or stay alive. Are we solving the Earth problem? We're not. But what it is for all you is an opportunity. If you're interested in doing cover crops, if you're doing cover crops, if you're doing no tillage, there's an opportunity to make money. Because there's a lot of money being poured into this space right now, like a lot of money. I was told, I think there's $15 trillion involved in this market right now, and it's supposed to go to like 32 trillion by like 2030. It's like it's an insane, ridiculous number. And right now, this is the only way that we're farming is the only way right now that we really have to the easy button to put carbon in the soil. So again, like we talk about, you guys probably already know this. So what are practices that promote, net removal from the atmosphere? And we, increasing crop residues, cover crops, using perennial grasses and legumes, using manure, compost additions, no-till, re-wetting organic soils. So, those people are, you think about how many soils have been drained, right, to farm, because if they weren't drained, listen, where my dad farms, it was a great black swamp in that area. That's not supposed to be farmland. So we drained it, and it's actually some very, very extremely productive farmland. So on a really, really good year, you're growing 250, 60, 70 bushel corn off of 150 pounds of nitrogen. So it's really productive. It probably wasn't meant to be farmed, but we're doing it anyways. And improved grazing. I mean, there's opportunities in that arena too. So questions on that before we pivot to some terms. I like to introduce some terms. That's a lot of information of like why. Questions or discussion? Everybody lost? It's kind of like a science lesson too. So the one thing that I feel is important is just understanding some terms, because how many of you, if you're looking into the carbon market, or if you've looked at the carbon markets, like all of a sudden everybody starts talking about all these terms. Have anybody heard some of these terms? So the reason that we're looking at carbon is so we want an offset. And an offset is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that occur elsewhere. So basically, I'm a business and I can reduce my carbon footprint by X, right? So we're just going to use a number. I'm producing a gigaton of carbon a year, just myself. I'm a terrible business, but I want to do better. And I find out that if I change some things and manage some other things differently, I can get a quarter of a gigaton myself. Why still, to be carbon neutral, how much do I have to offset yet? 3/4 of a gigaton. So I'm gonna go buy those. That's what carbon offsets are. They're being produced elsewhere, and I'm buying them to say that I'm net zero, because I can't do any more in my business. Does that make sense, everybody? That's what an offset is. Then there's something called insets. So that's decarbonizing one's value chain. So you're doing more good rather than doing less bad with what you're doing. So we'll go back to the example. I'm a chicken grower. I would be chicken grower today, or hogs. Or they have a chicken. And I'm producing so much CO2. And I can reduce my CO2 by, maybe there's some things I can do with capturing the methane, or I can capture some of the CO2 coming off of the building in some way, shape, or form. But there's only so much that I can do. So I reduce my footprint a little. What else can I do in that business besides sell offsets to those to reduce my carbon footprint with those chickens? Can I buy something that the chickens need that maybe is a lower carbon you got?
Well, depending on how the grain was grown.
There you go, that's it. Low carbon grain. I can buy an inset. I can buy something that I'm producing from something that a farmer's producing. So you hear about carbon intensity score. Has anybody heard about the carbon intensity score, the 45Z for your taxes or whatever? And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later, but I'm growing low carbon corn or low carbon soybeans, and now I'm a chicken farm. I'm going to grow, I'm going to pay more, I'm going to pay a premium for that grain from the farmer to get that, and I'm going to have an inset now, which is going to reduce my footprint even more. And now I have to buy less offsets. That makes sense? There's offsets, there's insets. I know it's really confusing.
So. I was talking with, maybe Chris Campbell about this the other day, about, some of the grain buyers, you know, are requiring some paperwork or. Even that, too, maybe it was somebody else. But anyhow, like, yeah, so they want you to sign something to show what it is that you're doing. Just so that you can, for you to sell it there for one thing, but also so that you can get, so that they can get the credits. From there.
And that's what an inset is. I've got something in my production chain that I can buy low carbon. And they're going to pay a premium. Most of them are going to pay premiums to do that. The silly thing about all this, what's the silly thing about all this? Who's paying for all this at the end of the day? We are, the consumer. We're going to pay. We're going to pay for this. It is. You know what I call it? It's money laundering. It's kind of a running joke that I had with. I was out west speaking to one of our consultants, and I was speaking to orchard growers out there, and because that's where some of the largest orchards in the U.S. And Microsoft owns the orchard out there, and they're requiring the orchard to participate in the carbon market. Well, why? Because you remember Microsoft was on this slide, right? So they bought an orchard. To me, they're paying money to buy the credit, but they're getting the money back. I told Craig, I said, that's money laundering at its finest right there. I said, they're just buying, they're getting money back.
That's what Bill's doing.
Yeah. So he's buying up, think about all the land he owns. He's probably going to be, for those who work on them, he's probably requiring carbon. He's probably getting money all back. So it's money laundering at its finest. Carbon removal is just drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere and storing it in some sort of terrestrial or aquatic environment. Regenerative agriculture, everybody's probably heard of that a lot. So you're trying to return back to what it was before we basically plowed the prairies or, you know, tore down the forest. You're trying to put it back the way it was by, you know, using different farming practices. So then we get into like some of the more carbon terms again. Permanence. Carbon remains stored in the soil. And you're going to notice, I'm going to show up a calculator a little bit ago. Like if you work with a company like Indigo, you'll only get 50% of your payment the first year. And then you'll get 20% in year 2 and then 10% in year 3. They want to make sure that you're not tilling the soil. Everything stacks after that. I'll show you how it works, but they want to make sure that it's there. And permanence for a lot of, I think it's the Carbon Action Reserve says permanence is 100 years. That's what they're looking for. When these companies are buying a credit, they want to make sure that it's there for 100 years. So you got to try to maintain your soil there. They're not saying you can't till it because again, you're gonna have years where it's wet and you go in and harvest, but they don't want you to till the whole field. Till the areas that fix the areas that need fixed, but don't. There are rules that go with this. Common practice. Credits can only be received on practices that don't exceed some percent of the population. So I am a conventional till farmer and I want to get into a carbon program. And I want to use the simplest thing that I can to get to the program because I don't want to spend a lot of money, right? That's where my mind first goes. Don't own anything because I don't want to put much risk out there. I'm risk averse. I don't want to put much risk out there. I got all this other stuff going on. So I want to use no-till. then what happened, potentially can't happen, and say, well, no, you can't use no-till. Well, why can't I use no-till? Well, you can't use no-till, Mr. Baker, because greater than 50% of the population in your area is already no-tilling, and therefore, that's called a common practice, so you should already do it, because it's a good thing to be doing. So there's little things like that that you may not be able to get into a program, so. And I'm gonna give some advice on that here in a little bit too. Additionality credits can only be received on practice that are in addition to what the grower is doing. So like if you're cover cropping today, you may not be able to get into the program. They are changing some of those things. I was talking to a representative from Indigo. Additionality used to be a lot more difficult than what it is today. If you just change your planting date by 2 weeks, you can still use cover crops and get in because it's making you change. Maybe you're planting green now instead of planting, terminating, and you're waiting the extra 2 weeks. So there are some loopholes now that you can get in. Additionality has gotten a little bit easier. They were very strict on this. That you already cover crop, it was punishing guys who are already like kind of ahead of the game. So they're trying to reverse course on that a little bit. And then the other ones is what we're really after is this. So, how much organic carbon can we store in the soil? Yeah, these practices. Does the term permanence, common practice, and additionality make sense? Because those are the ones that are kind of confusing. So what happens then if you want to get into a program? So you have a project. Indigo has a project, let's say, and it has to be a certified. And you'll see CAR 1459. CAR is the Carbon Action Reserve. So it's one of the verifiers. So if you really want to participate in the carbon market, you need to be working with somebody that is using this actually verification process. It's actually a registered credit. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. There's only a few companies that actually have registered credits. Period. As of right now. It was developed by Indigo Carbon, who follows the soil enrichment protocol, which again, there's the climate action, the climate action sets all the rules. So all those rules about permanence and additionality, that's not an Indigo Ag thing, that's not a BI. I can't think of some of the other companies, that's not their thing, it's being set. Or if you're really participating in a registered program, the rules are actually set by someone made a carbon action reserve. There's another one called Vera too, but that's more global, registry. The results are then reviewed by somebody like After Global Environmental Services. They report their findings back and then their credits are issued. This is why when you have your carbon credits, you don't get paid until, so for like this year, you're probably not going to get paid until next spring. This is why. You got, if it's done correct and registered correctly, you got to go through this whole process. It's got to be verified so it can be registered and recorded.
Luke, I've talked with a grower and said that they basically asked what were your previous practices, which he was no-tilling. He's like, I just told him I've been working the ground. I think I'm just gonna switch to no-till now. He goes like, well, okay, kind of deal. And I was like, well, with like Google Earth and technology, like
That's something that you asked that.
could that come back to bite?
Yes.
And I kind of mentioned that to him.
They actually, so when I was in Boston the last time at Indigo's meeting or whatever, they're using satellite imagery with artificial intelligence and they're doing a pretty good job of estimating what farmers are doing without. You kind of
I
gotta
don't
be,
know how far he is in the program.
you gotta be kind of truthful with your practices to a point, like they may not be able to tell, all that much. So they were just kind of developing that. So he's probably okay, but moving forward, they're gonna be kind of looking at things like this. You don't really want to lie.
Sure.
Or stretch the truth. Really just go still it, just go run something through it real quick and
Yeah.
but so yeah, they are finding out ways to watch that. To really basically they're saying, are you doing what you said you're going to do? They said the one thing that they have problems with is they can't tell the difference between wheat and a cover crop. They can't do that. That's a problem. So what they do then is, and we get a lot of samples at the laboratory. We used to only have like 2 or 3 carbon nitrogen analyzers. I think we have 14 now. It's because of all the amount of work. But that's still not enough. All the laboratories in the world can't run the amount of samples that would need to be run to make sure that carbon. So what they do is they run a certain amount of samples, and they're using all kinds of models. The two that are approved are the millennial model and the century model. And basically, you got to have soil aggregates, all kinds of stuff, and they feed it into the model, and they basically give you an estimate on the amount of carbon that you're storing in your soils. They actually just updated the model, so they were extremely conservative to begin with. I think we'll run the calculator in a little bit, but I think you can expect in this area probably up to like 0.6 of a ton of carbon in a year. That's probably fairly decent. If you're doing like mixed species cover crops, you might be able to push that to 0.7 or 0.8 tons per year. It's actually not a bad if you're paying. I think that they told me the other day the price for indigo is $53 a ton, and growers get 75% of that. It's not a bad number, especially if you're participating in some of these cost share programs. Maybe get cost shared on your cover crops, and then you actually can make some money. What they do is they train these models, and like I said, for the lab, for one, it's too costly to sample every year. If we had to sample every acre every year, the farm, you wouldn't get any money. There's not enough manpower. It's too costly to analyze. The testing is significantly more than just the same result. There's not enough labs to even handle the analysis. There are issues with the model. What you'll see them do with the models is they'll be more conservative on the low end because they can't oversell. If they oversell those carbon credits and get caught, they're in trouble. So what they do is they're conservatively, usually on the low side, and then as they update them, they become higher. Farmers are able to get more, but they have to be conservatively low. I talked about the standardization stuff. The Climate Action Reserve and Vera are the 2 big ones. Lab is a little bit. The labs ourselves, we need to be participating in programs too, and there's all kinds of committees and stuff. I serve on a lot of these different committees, just to try to be in the know. We are one of the leaders in this market as far as testing goes. So I sit on a lot of different boards. We'd have a lot of issues too. I mean, when you're getting 10,000 samples in on carbon, so if you get 10,000 soil samples, we can run that in 2 days through our lab. The standard soil sample. We get 10,000 samples of these, we can do 400 a day, because that takes like 8 minutes a sample to run. So it's a really big bottleneck for us. And then if you want the carbon nitrogen analyzers, I'll show on the next page. If you want one of those, it takes you like up to 9 months to get one. So there's only like 2 manufacturers in the whole world that produce it. So they're also using textures, so they feed that model not only organic or the soil carbon, but they're feeding it the texture to build a model, because they want to know the texture of your soil and organic matter levels, moisture corrected. Yeah, it's just not assembly line testing. It's complicated to do.
On the texture, you're looking at the CEC.
No, you're actually measuring the texture of the soil.
Well, but I mean, is that not related to CEC?
In some instances, it's not.
Texture, soils, or silt, sand and clay. Is that what you're talking about?
In some situations, so you get to the southeastern US, and it's not related to CEC. You're used to it being related in CDC here, yes, and it is in this area for the most part related to CDC. There are areas of the world where you have weathered clays. They're low activity. So southeastern US, tropics, if you get to places that it's not related to CEC. So you have to be careful just using CEC as the sole determinant of texture. So there's actually areas around here too, because organic matter plays into that.
That's what I was gonna say.
You could have a real sandy soil, but you could have it for whatever reason, at least organic matter, and you see the CEC maybe creep up or 6 to 8, which might suggest a more of a silty, a salty sand or something like that. But when it's actually just sand with organic matter, you have to be careful with texture.
I always thought, so cation exchange capacity is what CEC stands for. And I was thinking of the 2 parts that really contribute as being the clay and the organic matter.
Yeah. So you do have to just be a little careful with just using that. And the CEC too is how large of a storage area does the soil have to store your your calcium, your magnesium, potassium, ammonia, things like that. These are the carbonizing analyzers. These things are no more than what they are. They're $60,000 to $80,000 piece. But they're a furnace. The samples sit on top of there, they drop in, it's 1,100 degrees Celsius inside there, not Fahrenheit, Celsius. And it drops in there, and then a little bit of oxygen shoots in there, you get instant combustion. And then it takes, we don't use helium on these, we use argon, because helium is so expensive. But you use argon to carry it to the detector, and it actually measures the carbon. So this, when your soil reports, you see organic matter, that's not determined this way. That's determined by, we're weighing this, we're drying the soil, we're weighing it, we're ashing it at 360 degrees Celsius, we're weighing it again at weight differences. That's a quick and dirty way of determining. This is actually measuring the amount of carbon in the soil. So it's a completely different method, and it's a lot more costly to do this. That's it, it's like 8 minutes to sample to do this. So we're actually the largest consumer of this brand of analyzed elements are in the entire North America. There's a nice write-up on us on the website. They like us a lot because we use other analyzers. So where are samples coming from? We've got a lot of startups. The problem of it is I was working with one the last couple of weeks. It's a wild west. Let me tell you what, you think it's a wild west as a grower determining what program you give it. It's a wild west in the laboratory. What they want you to measure to. They're all different. They're all asking for different things because there's no real standardized way of doing this yet. I mean, that method I showed you standard, but how to prep to get to that point, every company it seems wants something a little bit different. So that's kind of a challenge right now for us as a laboratory too, because we're not a research laboratory. We are a commercial laboratory. Throughput is the thing that we do. So we actually almost said goodbye to a company last week because we were just tired of messing with like what they were requesting us to do. We were finally able to work it out, but I was to the point like this ain't worth the hassle anymore. We're not a university that sits there and processes 5 samples a day. And so that's what some of this is. They want so much prep to go into some of these samples that we just don't have the manpower, and it just doesn't make sense. You know, and guess what? They also don't want to do pay for the labor to get it. Probably 5 samples. Companies producing credits are using the build and verify models. We get a lot of research in private, for university and private sectors for research. And then we also get some requests for those individuals who are just trying to do regenerative ag and they just want feedback on their progress. They want to do feedback on their own. So I always tell them, I said, what's the point of doing this? And they're like, well, I said, because you're not going to get paid off of what you do. Like you can't just, hey, I'm going to get myself tested for carbon and take it somewhere and say, here's my carbon. That's not how that works. You got to go through their program and use their models and everything. But like, no, I'm doing regenerative. Okay, that's fine. I just want to tell you, you can't take this and go use it. So some of the current programs got Indigo Carbon, you got Nori, True Carbon by True Bayer, FBN, I think has a program with Land O'Lakes. BX is out of England, I think. It's hard to say. I have opinions on and you'll see that as we in the next few slides. I think moving forward. I think there's one company that does think about the rest. And I have my reasons for that. It's because they're independent. BX would be independent, but again, they're out of England. You need to do your homework. They kind of each have their kind of pros and cons. I mentioned earlier, there's only 2 companies in the US. Out of all this whole list, there's only 2 companies. I don't even know who the second one is. I know who the first one is, and they're the largest producer. I think there's been like, I forget, like 200 and some actual registered credits produced, and one company's produced all but 34 of them. And one other company has 34. None of these other companies are actually producing registered credits. They're not actually going through that whole verification process. So I don't know what they're doing. And I think that's why there's not really any money involved. You mentioned Truterra, I think that's why there's money involved, because they're not going through the process. So there's very little money involved. They're not actually going through the right verification process. They might just be trying to take your stuff to offset what they're doing. That's my theory. I think that's why Bear's in it. I think that's why Land O'Lakes is in it. I think they're trying to create their own offsets to offset what they're producing as a company. And that's why there's not as much money in it versus going to an open market and seeing what buyers actually will pay. So here's some things that you should look at. Make sure that the program, so somebody shared this with me, it's called, they call it Viper. Make sure the program is backed by brand-worthy partners and buyers. So who are the buyers? Who's buying the carbon from it? Who's buying that registered credit? Are they buying, or is it an open market? Is it actually like, like large companies like your Amazons? Like who's buying that credit? Because if they tell you, oh, well, it's just for our use, well, you're not going to get probably as much value out of something like that. Are they independent? Does the program stand to win when growers win? So or another corporate motive. That goes back to my comment again. Is it for themselves, or are they actually like trying? They're looking out for you as well. They're trying to get you value, bring themselves value, but also sell it on an open market. Are the payments set at market premium and paid in cash? Do the farmers receive the majority? Can growers across many states, crop types, and farm sizes enroll? And are the registry issued credits or credits backed by a third party registry? So, and if they are, guess what they're going to have? You're going to have more money. You're going to get paid more if they're actually registered credit, because the companies are going to, that's what they want to buy. These large companies that all say by 2030 they want to be carbon neutral, they want registered credits. Because when the tax man comes, or whoever comes and verifies that they're doing it, they need to have the paperwork saying, yeah, this is a registered verified credit.
So when is it gonna come down to our level where we have to demonstrate that we're only using X number of gallons of 28% nitrogen, X number of gallons of diesel fuel, so forth and so on?
Well, you can, that's a carbon intensity program I mentioned earlier. So there's, like, we'll get to that. And I don't have as many details on that as I do on just the open carbon market. But here's what I was talking about. So growers adopt a new practice. Carbon credits are produced from that practice. Carbon credits help offset emissions. These kinds of sort of corporations are buying it. So like you see Barclays up here, there's the bank. You see the North Face, Fat Tire, Ralph Lauren. So, some big name companies that are actually, some of the buyers.
See, we're around 11 o'clock. Do you want to take a 5-minute break? Or
Sure, we can.
Yeah.
Everybody want to take a break? I keep going too.
Anybody need a break? Or you're welcome to just take a break anyway and let them go into. So, but yeah. I think might as well keep going.
Yeah, if we need to stop, just tell me, we'll stop and take a little bit of a break. So there's, just this has been interesting. So again, I have data for Indigo because I have a relationship with them. I don't get paid by them, by the way. I don't get anything from them. But $8 million to growers in 3 years. Here's what's interesting. The first year they had 267 growers. So they're the first adopters. There's 450 growers. 1,000. Last year they had 1,030 acres. So you can see it's growing. You can see there's more interest in the market. What they say, it's a 330%, 333% year-to-year average increase in new acres, 7% increase in new fields. So it's just, you're getting more and more people, even some of these growers too, because you see the acres and stuff increase in new fields. Some of these are like, hey, I just want to try a couple fields. I just want to see what it is. So you're seeing more growers just sign up the rest of their farm.
Luke, I don't know if this is. Well, I'll save it for a break. Never mind. Question.
Are the payments increasing or it's?
Yeah, we'll talk about that too. Here's your eligible crop list. Here's where they're working now as far as Indigo goes. This is what's interesting. If you're really going to do this, you can improve your nitrogen timing, you can improve diversify your crop rotation, you can reduce your tillage. If you really want the big bucks, you got to go with no-till and you got to go with cover crops. Because if you really want to get payout on this, you're looking at no-till and cover crops if you really want to get involved.
Yeah, do you no-till on both crops, or is it? Can you do it just on soybeans, for instance?
You can, but you're going to get dinged Because you're paying, I don't know if you'll get a payment back, you know what I mean? I think you can, but you're not, you won't get it, and I'll show you how that stacks, and which hurts your long-term potential growth. Right now, they're saying that the prices are probably going to be, I think they're $53 right now, they're saying next year they're looking at like $60 to $80 for prices. Which you think about, I think it was, they started like 15 or 20, is where they started on year one and I think it was $15 or $20. Well, the interesting thing, and I said, I'm not here to like sell anything, so I'm not gonna pay by this, that first credit that Indigo paid out at $15 or $20 an acre, over half of that was their own money. There weren't enough buyers. They actually were creating the market themselves to try to get people into the market. So I found that interesting that they took venture capital money, they took somebody else's money, but they were paying that out from the beginning to like get a market started, try to get an open market started because they saw potential. There's a really interesting paper that was published in 2023 in Nature, and it actually interviewed people like yourselves. And that's what I think is interesting about it. And so why, what are some concerns, and why did you adopt it? So one of the comments out of it is I have environmental motivations and there's co-benefits if I'm doing no-till and cover crops. The practices benefit my bottom line. One farmer actually said payments for the offsets are the motivation. And when you read the paper, it basically goes on to say, look, I'm looking down the road to my kids and grandkids. And what I realized is that if I do some of these things, I keep the soil in place and the soil's, more productive. And so he's looking at like legacy, which I think is really interesting. Like the payments, that's great. That's just icing on the top. But he goes, I'm not doing it for payments. I'm doing it because long-term legacy. Practices that increase long-term stability, sustainability of the farm. Some of the negatives, people said payments are too low, and I think that depends on what program that you're in. Paperwork administration is a burden, and that is true. There is added paperwork to this because you do have to have some records. I know if you are interested in signing up like Indigo with something like Indigo, don't do it until later this summer because their paperwork is getting easier. Like they're making the process. They told me it's like less than 30 minutes now to sign up. It's like getting easier and easier. They're finding ways. Lack of predictable payments. That's all market driven. If you're in a program that's being driven by the market, if you're in a program that it doesn't have registered credits and stuff, you're probably kind of getting screwed. Because you're not on the open market, you're probably just selling your carbon to somebody who's using that's offset what they're doing. Bias to benefit big agriculture is what some say that markets are not fair in principle. This goes back to my comment of it's really kind of money laundering in a way. Those who have, like Bill Gates who have a lot of land that are forcing this kind of money laundering. Greenwashing through offsets, meaning that companies are just they're not really trying. They're just saying, hey, we want to buy your carbon. That's a cheap and easy way for us, so we don't have to do the work. So we're just gonna do that way. And then the additionality they creates an unfair work. So and some of those rules on additionality, I said, are changing. Here's some of the data that you need to collect. I actually threw this in here yesterday. So you're going to need your tillage dates, steps, your planting dates, crop planting, some fertilizer application stuff. If you're grazing, this is all grazing manure over here. So if you don't do any of that, then you don't have to worry about grazing manure. If you look at grazing, it's actually a big list. I a little bit more challenging if you're doing the grazing thing. Cash crop outcome. Planting your cover crop planting date, what species, the blends, and then how you terminated it, your start date. So if you think about it, it's not a lot, but if you're kind of like not collecting this information, it is a lot. Like if you're writing it down on a napkin and you don't know where that napkin is anymore, that's kind of a problem. So I hope nobody's doing that. I think that my dad still does some of that because it's stuff, all those little notebooks. How many of you still have a notebook that you put in your pocket? And Oh, that's technology though. That's different than, I was actually talking to paper notebook.
I know.
Okay. Okay, so what I wanted to show right now, because I think this is interesting. I gotta stop the share on this screen. Here we go.
Are you doing anything for forest land?
For forest land. I don't know if, I think they're working on the models for forests. Because I know we saw samples come from Washington, Oregon, which out there you've got more orchards and forests and stuff. I think that their target was farmland first, because corn and beans are, it's like for us, corn and beans are easy. I think that was easier to tackle. And you saw the crop list. I think that stuff was easier to tackle. Forest land's a little bit more difficult because the roots are shallow and most of the carbon is stored in the wood. And that's a little bit different. You know, you're not really storing necessarily in soil unless you're doing some sort of, you know, rows, like cover crop rows or something like that. Most of the carbon in trees is stored above ground. I want to share my screen on the Zoom. Maybe. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to run two things. There we go. So what I'm going to show is this cover crop calculator. Let me refresh it because it probably will update to our area. Yeah, we are Franklin, Indiana. So let's do, what kind of acreage do you guys want me to put in? Give me a farm size, like a total farm size. What would be kind of normal for like a farmer to have in this area?
Of both crops, of all
Yeah,
crops?
everything that you're doing.
Just put 1,000.
Okay, I got 1,000 acres. All right. And let's see, I want to do the advanced. I'm going to do, I plan to reduce my tillage and plant cover crops on 1,000 acres. And so this is what this is kind of what you're looking at. So it's saying, depending on what you do. So if you do kind of the bare minimum of this, they're saying like 0.2 metric tons of carbon per acre per year. And the max is 0.9. And so what they're doing is they're running a model for you in the background saying, hey, here's the lowest that you're probably going to get, but here's the max that you can get if you're potentially doing everything right. And then what it's doing is it's giving you a total cost over a 5-year period. So on that 1,000 acres, you're going to get an average of $56,000 over the 5 years, but it could range from 16,000 to 75,000 based on this carbon stored thing, right? I put it at 0% growth. Let's say the carbon market, the payment is $40 this year and you get 75% of that. And it's 75%. So that's $40 per ton. And you're only doing whatever the calculator said here is whatever half between the split is between 0.9 and 0.7. So you're only getting 75% of that amount. And I'm saying, I don't think this market's going to grow. I think it's going to stay $40 a ton for how many years? Here's what the payout. The first year, you're going to get $9.86 per acre. And that's off of $40. You only get 50% the first year because they want to make sure that permanence thing is happening. That, okay, I got my money, I'm going to go out and till. So if you got the whole amount in the first year, they're afraid you're going to go out and till, and so that violates the permanence thing. So what they're doing is you get 50% here, you get 20% here for the first year, then 10 and 10 and 10. The second year, you're also going to do it too. So the second year, you get 50%. So you get the 20% from the first year, and then the 50% from this year. Now it's $15.51 an acre. And then it's $15.11. It keeps going through that. And then in the fifth year, you're getting $17.84 an acre. And that's if the market doesn't increase. So that's saying like nothing's going to change. Nobody's going to do it. It's $40 an acre. But let's say it goes up 10%. Let's say every year it's going to go up, the market's going to go up 10%. And I'm gonna tell you why that's probably not a bad thing it's probably going to be somewhat around that area, I would guess. You're up to like $67,000 over 5 years, and it's $986. So $986 because again it's still $40. The second year is 17, of course, the fifth year is up to 2611. And then as you keep going, again, you're gonna have this out the sixth year, the seventh year, the eighth year, the ninth year, but they don't give 5 years or 5 years. Look at. Now, let's say, so here's another possibility. The oh crap moment. That's what I like to call it. What year did I say most of these companies wanted to be carbon neutral by? 2030, right? What year is this year?
24.
24. You know how many of these companies are actually doing anything? Very few. Who studies economics and supply and demand?
Yeah.
So these companies, and what they're seeing is, and what we're seeing is nobody's really doing a whole lot yet. And they've got all these promises made to the consumer. And what we think could potentially happen, and again, this isn't for sure, but what we think could potentially happen is come 2027, we're 3 years away from that, and there's this, oh crap. We're not working towards our offset. Guess what happens to a market when the demand goes out? You've got to increase supply really, really quick. And if you don't increase supply quick enough, what happens to the price? The price gets to be outrageous. So let's say that happens, and now we're 30% year-over-year increase. That fifth year, like come 2030, you could be out to potentially like $51 an acre. Again, it's all speculative, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there's a lot of promises that have been made of what these companies are going to do, and there's not a lot of companies being involved right now trying to get their carbon footprint reduced. So this is something to keep an eye on. So if you are interested in this calculator, I can send it to Danny, and you can play with it. It's kind of fun. Mess around with it. You can't increase the price, I don't think. It's the one, I think it has to stay, because that's what it is, right? You can go down, you can't go up, but that's what it is right now. I was told as well, like $60 to $80 is kind of what they're looking for next year. It could be 57, it could be 87. They don't know, they're just kind of in a range, could be 62. It's kind of, you know, again, it's all speculative. Again, it's on that whole supply and demand thing. So questions on the calculator? So if you have an interest, you know, let Danny know and I can get that to him. The right thing, yeah. So that there I talked about the oh crap moment. This is what I find is interesting. There's something with indigo, they're calling a market plus. So remember we talked about insets, right? So there's offsets and insets. And basically insets for you guys would be what? Somebody sourcing low carbon grain. Is there a large
Ethanol plant. So, yeah.
that could be an ethanol plant. Is there a large cattle feeding or chicken or anything like that?
Rose Acres down at Seymour and.
Okay, let's use Rose Acres. They're in our area. Let's use Rose Acres. Let's say Rose Acres comes to Indigo and say, hey, we need 5 million bushel of low carbon corn. And it goes, yeah, we actually got guys signed up in your area that we can do that. Well, what are you willing to pay for it? And they come knocking on your door. Hey, we got an opportunity for you. Somebody needs an inset. It's Rose Acres. They're willing to pay $2 over market price for low carbon corn because they need insets. Yada yada yada. And
You're saying Indigo comes to talk to you about that, or what?
Indigo. So if
Rose Acres comes to talk to you.
it's probably get the price of where you want it. It'd probably be run through like Indigo.
Okay.
And I mean, they could try to do it because Indigo's got all your information on it. It's already set up. You're already ready to go. There's not really anything you got to do. They know you're producing low carbon grain already. Would be nothing else for you to do except for, yes, I don't want to sell my carbon to Indigo this year, but I want to sell my grain to Rose Acres. And guess what you'll be able to do? Flex. I'm not going to take a carbon payment this year because at a $2 premium on 200 bushel corn, I can get $400 an acre versus the 50 or the $40 an acre I was getting on carbon. You're gonna be able to flex. So in the next year, guess what? There's not for soybeans. There's not a low carbon market for that. So guess what you can do? You flex back into carbon. They're gonna allow you to flex programs. And what does a farmer want to do more than anything? What do you guys all want to do more than anything else?
I wanna give money.
You want to shop around for the best deal, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's gonna allow you to do. Where can I get the most bang for my buck? Where can I get the most money?
So you just hit the pause button on
And
the
then you-
carbon program so you can sell it somewhere else.
You sell your
Otherwise,
grain,
not
low
locked
carbon
out.
corn, grain,
Gotcha.
and then next year when there's not a soybean program, you flex back into the soy, and then when you go back to corn, you flex back, and you just. Wherever the price is the best, you'll be able to flex and do. Now, this isn't fully developed because not all the markets, but they're working on developing these markets right now, this market source program.
So the soybean crushers that are being proliferated for renewable fuels, they will be,
Potentially, if they can't get on the 45Z program, which is the IRS carbon intensity calculator thing, that they could potentially go this route. And then you'll be able to flex. No other program right now will allow you to flex. I think it was program trying to be able to allow you to flex. They do it for cotton. They have places that with people who grow cotton now in the South that they have this flex where they grow cotton, you can flex it into so like a North Face, I want low carbon cotton. And then they want to, but next year I'm growing corn, where they flex back to the carbon program. So you can, wherever the money's the best, you can flex. So I think that's an interesting opportunity. So anyways, this was just showing this. So I gave the example of business. I have business A, B, C, and D. Here's their total carbon output from their business. And again, I just was trying to do this easy. This is A, B, C, and D can do the internal reduction. So internal are controls that I can do internally, like my employees smoke less. That's not one. But you see what I'm saying? The things that knobs that they can turn internally to reduce their carbon output. A, B, and C, the insets. Like again, maybe this is a food production company and they can source low carbon chicken. And this one is, I don't know, an ethanol plant or something. They want low carbon corn or something. They can buy insets and then whatever's left, they got to buy these carbon credits for offsets.
This, time wise, we're.
Okay. So here's the flex I was telling you about. Low, what's the CI score? Carbon intensity. How many have heard about that? The 45Z. Okay, so that's something that's newer. We don't know the rules yet. How about that? We don't know what we don't know because there are people out there saying that they've got the whole carbon intensity thing figured out and that they got registered. There is no registered credits for carbon intensity. There's nothing registered for carbon intensity. Indigo's working on it. It's almost the same data that you need for carbon that you can do for CI score. The 40B, which is the aero like airplane fuel, that one's set. It's the model set and everything else. This model for this 45Z is not going to be released until later this summer. So if you hear anybody telling you anything different than that you can get your carbon credit ICI score, the 45Z, we don't even know the model yet that the government's going to approve. This is an IRS thing that you can file and get credit on biofuels by selling your corn for biofuels. Indigo is working with energy producers right now. They're basically what's being recommended that you enroll and practice it. So if you're thinking of doing cover crops or you're currently doing cover crops, you should go. If you ever want to get a payment, you should just enroll. You don't have to actually file for credits. Does that make sense? So you can just enroll and just sit and wait if you want to. But what it does, if you enroll in any program, it sets your baseline. what it does. It's in your baseline. So I like when I talk about the baseline, I'm in a weight loss competition and I want to win. Would I want to go and lose 15 pounds before I enter the weight loss competition? No, because I want to win, right? So would I start doing cover crops or no-till or anything if I'm not doing it before I signed up for something like this just to set my baseline? No, I want to sign up, even if I don't file for it. I may not file for carbon credits for 10 years, but I want to set my baseline as low as I can. So I want to be as fat as I can before I start the weight loss competition. It's the same thing here. I want to set my baseline as low as I can before I actually enroll in a program. So don't start doing things until you get your baseline set. If you have any inkling of changing any kind of practice on your farm and you think you might want to get a payment, you should probably enroll. Key points, there's going to be opportunity to flex. Take advantage of all cost sharing. I mentioned that earlier real quickly. If there's any kind of cost share program, you could do the USDA and RCS programs, you do any cost share program, still get that payment and get the carbon payment or the market plus payment, or you can stack those payments. If you got a local thing going on, like the local soil and water is giving you money for something, you can do that and still get a carbon payment. So use the offsets and any kind of other government program to your advantage if you're thinking of doing this. I don't know, there's not a lot of answers yet on the whole CI score. 45Z does not have any certified CI score yet. And so that's the model until the summer. And so if you're going to make a practice change, get signed up so you can claim anything that you do. So what are we supposed to end by noon?
Yeah, I think Pete's is gonna be here.
Okay, what questions do you have? What do you want to talk about? Because I can talk about carbon. I got some more slides on carbon. I got some stuff, a little bit of stuff on soil health. What do you want me to go? We have 30 minutes. I want to put us. I've probably overwhelmed you or bored you thoroughly with carbon credits.
Would you say we're not really making it without the carbon? We're just taking advantage of theirs.
Well, so you're going to be paying for it in the store. So you might as well get the money back so you can pay for your groceries.
But for the environment.
For the environment, you're really not doing a whole lot. If you look at the amount of carbon that we're pumping, and it's more than 36 gigatons, it's probably upwards in the 40s if I went and looked today what it is. We are not making it dead. But it looks good.
It's gonna
Market.
be like.
I mean, that's what I assumed, but.
Yeah, it's gonna be like buying a bag of corn chips that says gluten-free, now it'll say carbon neutral.
And you'll pay, instead of $4.99 for the bag of corn chips, you're gonna pay $6.99 for the bag of corn chips and wish you had your $2 or $10 an acre carbon credits also your grocery bill less. It'd be outrageously high. That's really work. It's the easy button, it looks good. The people on the, like I said, most people don't understand the science. They don't understand what's going on, but it's a marketing thing that sounds good. Right.
So like an Amazon or any of those companies that have committed to 2030. What happens if they don't make it? You know, if they have, we don't have, you know, they say they don't have enough of it bought, or they can't get it bought, or it changes their business model.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna be expensive.
Right.
They don't have that penciled in yet, then.
That's a good question because it really boils down to the consumer. So how hard is AOC gonna come down on Amazon for not making? That's really what it boils down to. How hard are these consumers on either coast gonna really crack down on these companies if?
Well, you know, they bought stuff in China for the next 20 or 30 years, you know.
Yeah.
The consumer's easily committed to that stuff on Sunday afternoon. We talked about it until Tuesday evening, when they've got kids in practice and they're buying the cheapest thing most of the week they can find. I don't think they'll put their money behind it.
And they may not.
Without some kind, you know, maybe like some kind of.
And you don't know what our administration is going to do either.
what-
That's a question mark that is, you know, hangs over all this shit. You really don't know what who, I'm not gonna say who will be elected president. I have a pretty good idea who will be elected president. I don't know if either one of them will make it through their term. To be honest with you, because they probably shouldn't be running for president. But again, so who is in the background going to be the vice president, either one of those cases, and then what decision they're gonna be making? I think that's really the next election boils down to. People gotta start looking at who the vice president is. And what kind of policies do they have? Because I tell you what, if you have the wrong, if Biden becomes president again, you have the wrong person as vice president. It could be bad. Things could be enacted. Because you've seen that push in different things and like fuel prices and.
Is it really the, like, people buying the stuff that are holding them accountable, or is it their shareholders? Because when they make that promise,
Both.
if they don't meet that promise, it's the shareholders who get oust them as leadership of the company.
Both.
I mean, we're not gonna be changing our payments based on what they.
But look at like who's, I mean, because Amazon has shareholders, but who has still control of Amazon?
I mean, with the monopoly they have, I don't think anyone's gonna be stopping or starting Amazon based on whether or not they reach the 2030 goal. I feel like it's more a matter of the concept of ESG, environmental, social governance investing, and that's why these companies are doing that. Am I wrong then? Like, it's not, we're not buying stuff. You can't go to someone and say, are you gonna buy this Amazon product? No, it's not carbon neutral. They didn't say they're gonna be carbon neutral by 2030. I'm not buying it. I don't really hear consumers saying that. What I see is the people on the coast and Wall Street really, are saying, hey, if you follow these practices, companies tend to do better if they focus on their environmental, social, and governance impact. They will do better in the long run. And so we want you
But
to.
again, that's all driven by the consumer.
But the consumer's not making that decision.
Yeah, they are. Why would you buy,
I don't make that decision.
look where you're from.
I don't think people on coast are making that
I
decision
think
either.
you need to go to the coast. I think,
I really don't. I've been to the coast. I really don't think that's the case.
yeah, there is a lot of talk. So you go into some of these places and like you see people buying things like I wouldn't buy, like that's not the choice that I would make, and for that reason. So and they're the shareholders too. A lot of them are the shareholders as well.
The shareholder more like, well, the majority of the shareholders, big companies, so it's BlackRock, it's, what are the other two, Vanguard, and the other third one that own the majority of Amazon. They are the ones who control where it's going in that direction. There's no government regulation saying, hey, you have to say you're gonna be carbon neutral. And
Not
so-
yet, but the consumer, again, so why would the environmental social government, that whole thing? If people, that wouldn't even exist if people didn't care. It's not that, somebody has to care about that, and there has to be enough people. So the 360 million people in the United States, there has to be enough people that care about that to actually make that happen, or else it wouldn't be a thing at all.
Mhm.
And there's enough.
To have a mega.
Right, there's enough, so it is consumer driven. And there's enough people with enough, again, a big enough megaphone that speak out about it. Now, it may not be 60% of the population. But who gets the oil? The squeaky wheel. And there's enough squeaky wheels, like, I mean, just look at what has happened with, you could talk about LGBTQ or all these different things. That's not the majority of our population, but they get a lot of face time. And it's the same thing with this. It may only be 20% of the population, but that 20% is loud and they drive a big cause. And it's a lot of these young people too. And the reason being is that there's been a change in generation. There's a huge generational gap. So I'm a generation, I sit on X and I'm a millennial. I have behaviors that do both, function in both ways, but the millennials and the Gen Zers are all about a cause, finding a cause. Well, guess what you're doing? You're a consumer too, and you're driving things based on making decisions, you're having a voice, you're all a cause. So it is consumer driven. It is, I want a cause and I stand for those calls. I'm going to be loud about it. And so there is consumer driven about it. And then the company is only successful with the consumer. But now the consumer companies are successful.
There's going to be some major societal changes. There's a concept called a 15-minute city. Where you live, you can walk to your work, you can walk to your shopping, you can walk to your entertainment. All within 15 minutes, so 15 minutes says all of this is within a mile radius of where your home is. And this is being done, if anyone's been to Chattanooga or through I-24 lately, used to be a huge old iron foundry that was years old. It's all defunct because Chattanooga is becoming one of these model 15-minute cities.
The power and is the power and light district in Kansas City. All these large cities all have like little bitty bits that they're developing. And there's also smart cities and stuff. So
So the idea of being, okay, so if I can walk everywhere, then I don't need automobiles. And I depend on a mass transportation to get me from here to some remote place that I want to go, and then I'll come back. So, you know, there's major changes being made in society that will facilitate some of this stuff coming in.
well, and then you have electric cars. How many people have an electric car in this room? You know, before that car even, so that, and that's being driven, that's consumer driven and stuff as well too. Before an electric car is comes out of production, how many miles do you think you could have driven how many miles do you think I could have driven my Honda HR-V sitting out here in the parking lot before that thing even comes off production line? Because the amount of energy it takes to produce aluminum, the amount of energy it takes to mine the lithium, give me a guess in that. Almost 60,000 miles I could have driven that car before the amount of energy used to produce the one Tesla that comes off the line. So this whole idea of like, we're doing really, really good for the environment. Well, long term, that batteries, yeah, but like the amount of it's very energy intensive to produce these vehicles off the lot. And again, that's consumer driven, that's an ESG, it's all
Also very subsidized. I know Tesla would not be profitable if it wasn't for government subsidy, and that goes for many other electric car companies. I'm just thinking much more of a top-down push than a bottom-up push. From like the 15-minute city is a World Economic Forum idea, and that's where the ESG principles are coming from, is World Economic Forum. So I'm just like, I don't really see that bottom-up as much. I see a lot of government push for this. And a lot of that comes back to that money laundering we're talking about, where these companies are already invested into this. And so they're betting that the government's going to regulate it. And if the government doesn't regulate it, then they're kind of falling flat.
some of it, you're absolutely, some of it is, again, who votes for the politicians, so who drives the government. There are humans involved in this that are consumers, and there are enough loud people that are driving.
You know, 50 years ago, there was a major pollutant change. The amount of hydrocarbons released in just the paint that went on a car. Again, there was enough emissions off of that paint that it was like, again, a 50,000 mile change. I mean, and we put emission controls on the engine, but the real pollutant was painting the car.
Yes.
Could we talk about cover crops? Our
Yes.
time's
Yeah.
short.
What do you want to talk about from process?
Well, here's my number one question.
Yeah.
How do you get, as I was telling you before, how do you get a good mix of cover crops that gives you erosion control, a biological activity, a nutrient sequestration, and any other little benefits? But I mean, the first thing with cover crop, you've got to understand, what are my 3 or 4 major goals to choose the cover crop?
And that's why I took you to the calculator.
Yeah.
The estimator, and that's what we were doing. And so what you gotta do is, you gotta know your plan. When can I plan? What are my goals? You know, what can I get access to? What kind of seeds can I get access to? And like I told you before, is you gotta, when you do find that, you gotta try it. Because what's gonna happen is if you try it, it's an absolute failure, and a lot of guys will just say, cover crops are, I ain't doing this again, because that was a mess. I said, my dad still has nightmares from the neighbor down the road, they had a multi-species mixed cover crop, and it was 2000, was it 12 or 11 that was really dry? 12. 11 was too, I think. but-
11 was too.
But 12 was, so what happened was, is they left it and they planted Greene. And it got really, really dry, and what he remembers is, it would come September, there was corn this tall in the field, there was corn this tall in the field, and it was a complete total nightmare. And they just sold out into the whole field, and it wasn't managed properly. And so like, my dad's like, man, I tried that, you remember what the neighbors did, so, and that's what you gotta be careful, because as soon as you have that failure, it messes, it really messes with your psyche. So what you gotta do is you gotta go out and try. And you talk about Dave Grant, and I don't know if you've ever seen what Dave Grant would do. He actually do strips. He would replicate strips or do strips in fields. He wouldn't necessarily do an entire field until he had the mix right that he really, really wanted. And I think that's kind of where you kind of have to start if you're getting started, is you gotta, okay, see what the neighbors are doing, or seeing what the people around you are doing. And then trying it on small areas in your field. And the other thing, like I told you, is you can't manage it just like, I'm throwing out the seeds and I'm going to Florida for the winter. It's, hey, this is, I gotta manage it like a wheat crop. I gotta manage it like any other kind of cash crop. That it takes some attention, and then depending on what you're doing, it might take a little fertilizer, it might take, it's probably gonna take some sort of management. When you're gonna burn it down, if you're planting Greene, or you're gonna crimp, or, whatever those things are, it takes, how am I doing these things? What happens if I have bowls? I've heard that in different areas where you have, bowls, and you plant your corn, and then now you're missing 12 feet a row, and, how are you handling all those things? What are your contingency plans? And that's why I said, you gotta figure all that stuff out on a small scale before you ever take it to a big scale. And that's what I encourage people to do. And I said, just because you talk to the neighbor, they're doing it successfully, does not mean that exactly what they do, you will do it, because they're probably gonna miss a step that they told you in their process. So I said, that's how I tell people who want to get it. And
You also have to be aware of what your chemical program is too, what your residual.
you have to do all those things.
What questions do you have about the cover crops? Anything? Tell me a little bit about soil health. Do cover crops help with soil health?
So it really depends. I think if you got like a situation like this, and I forget how long the years ago, it's been a while. So my wife and I built a house, and they did a really bad job of backfilling around the edge. And so we had a garden in the yard. And so what I did was I covered multi-species cover crop, and there was like 10, 12 different things. And then we had the yard, and it was all planted the same day and all tilled the same and everything else. And this is what I got. This was, I think, about 12 weeks later. And so you can see we didn't really have much there. So what I did was I took a sample out here and I took a sample inside that. And what I was trying to do was just kind of compare like how quick things can change. On most agricultural fields that have probably been treated, really, really well. So I think like some of the like stuff like that farms, it's really fertile, really like, 3, 4, 5% or 3.5 to 5% organic matter is a lot of it. 5.5%, it creeps up there. Some of it can get up to 6. You wouldn't see this sort of response. And so if you're doing cover crops, and like I drove down through here and stuff, and some of the farmland all the way down through here, so it's pretty good. You get to like along I-70 and stuff, there's some pretty good farmland around there. You're not going to see a response like this in a cover crop. I mean, this is from that grassy area. This is from the cover crops, and this was only 12 weeks. Just look at the aggregation of that soil. I mean, that's completely night and day. That's side by side in that plot. So, but you can see a difference in this in that short amount of time. So can it be measured? Yes, but I think you're only going to measure it in you know, in these real extreme situations. So you talk about your hillsides, that you might be able to measure it a little bit easier than soils that are, you know, more difficult to manage. But in soils that are your higher productivity soils, you're probably not gonna see, you know, the response. It's like going out to Illinois, and you could be the worst farmer in the world in Illinois, and what can you get? 250 bushel corn, yeah, 80 bushel soybeans. You can be the worst farmer. Well, that's the same with the cover crops. You're probably not going to see a huge response. You're probably still giving you're giving a benefit because you have living organisms, something living in the soil all year round. I actually did run the Haney test on ours, and just out of curiosity, and we did see like soluble phosphorus increase. We saw respiration increase, like respiration, this grass area was like 16 parts per million, which is extremely low. And in that cover cropped area, it went to almost 40. It's almost doubled in 12 weeks. So that means you did help the microbiology of the soil. And helping the microbiology of the soil, we saw like a 24 part per million of phosphorus in the cover crops versus 11. And this again, it's the same soil side by side. It's just there's just no biological activity. So those microbes were actually helping, you know, release some of the phosphorus. They were helping the system. That's kind of what I've seen in measurement. The easiest, cheapest way kind of to measure something like this is looking at that soil aggregation. I mean, that's a cheap, easy way. Carbon is another one. Just look at your carbon stock. If you, hey, I do in cover crops, I've done it for a couple of years. Did I really change the soil? And if you can have a side by side and like just measure the total organic carbon of the soil, and oh yeah, I can see it's up. You know, carbon has all sorts of benefits to the soil. You know, stores water. If you increase your organic matter by 1% in the soil, guess how much additional water that holds on an acre? 10,000 gallons. 10,000 gallons of water per person. So if you can just, and it holds nutrients. We talked about cation exchange capacity. The higher organic matter, the more storage capacity you have in your soil for nutrients. It's good for the microorganisms. It's good for the soil temperature. It helps keep it cooler in the summertime, warmer in the wintertime. Aggregation, soil aggregation. So there's just a ton of benefits from, you know, carbon in general. So that's kind of the what I've seen as far as measuring. You see all these companies that like measure like DNA, and you know, I don't know like how beneficial that is unless you're after, like I said, I understand if you're looking for a disease, I would find that, you know, hey, does this DNA show up and should I be doing a seed treatment? To me, that makes sense. So is that what you're kind of looking for?
Yeah.
There's some other things out there too. There's an interesting paper published, and there's it's called POC, permanganate oxidizable carbon, and they used a machine learning method, and it teased it out. It was interesting at rainfall, where of course rainfall is the most important thing to a crop. This study was done in Missouri. The second most important thing to the corn crop was, how did the rain come? Did it come in 1 4-inch event, or was it spread out over time? That was the second most important thing. And then the fourth most important thing was POC, which is your permanganate oxidizable carbon, which is your carbon that's available to your microbes. And they found like there was actually a critical value. It was like 400 in these Missouri soils. They found it was like 450 parts per million. Somewhere right here, 450 parts per million. You had that, and all of a sudden you saw your corn will go up and then a flat line. But just like if you have critical values for soil test potassium and phosphorus, they found a critical value for epoxy, and that basically 100 or 15 megagrams per hectare is basically going for 240 bushel corn. So once you hit that level, you got 240 bushel corn. The other thing they had to point out in this study is look what happens after they planted after. I had May, it's about May 26th. Look what happens to your corn yields. So we actually are starting to do some of this work ourselves, because I've been playing with machine learning and stuff for some time. Actually, before I found this paper, was doing some of the same work, and then once I found the paper, I was like, I'm doing it right.
So is this epoxy, is anybody doing that in their soil testing?
We see some. We see some.
And how does it vary from, let's say, month to month through the year?
It's more stable.
Okay, so,
It's more stable because it's a larger value.
okay,
It's a larger value. So like on the hay that you're getting restoration varies a lot through the
Yeah.
year. But the epoxy seems to be more stable throughout the year. And that's why I think the university there, some of the universities kind of mess with it. Again, this was in Missouri. They're taking it for what it's worth. That was the first study I'd seen.
So is that a piece of the soil health test or not?
No, epoxy is not,
Okay,
not the haying test. It's a separate.
okay.
So the USDA, the Soil Health Institute has their methods. That is one for them.
Okay. Okay, interesting.
Again, the soil health is kind of an undefined realm as well.
Mhm.
Other questions? When people are ready for lunch and they're hungry. Maybe people want to go to the field.
Yeah, well. So. A farmer in today's climate or situations, what are the things, the levers that they can pull to make the most difference? At this point, you know, in their situation, if they're, say, if they've got technology available to them, what things do they need to be looking at? I mean, like you mentioned, as far as like making a difference, one of the things is some of the programs that are available. Another, you know, looking at this, obviously planting date, you want to beat certain dates. I remember reading, and so as far as levers that they can pull,
So, I mean, if you have technology, you should really should be collecting all the data that you can be. That to me is critical, and you need to find somebody to help you. You don't know what to do with the data, you need to find somebody to help you work with that data. Because you can uncover some interesting things, and you either need to kind of find a group of farmers to kind of come together and do it with, or if you're large enough, you kind of do it like, you might be large enough to kind of do individually. Well, what we saw is you can start to like make recommendations almost on a field by field basis. So like these critical levels that have been developed by the universities, those have been developed over a wide area. And like we have spots on my dad's farm, we have malic 3 phosphorus close to 20 parts per million and still grow 80 bushel beans. But if you look at Ohio State, the tri-state recommendations are saying, you know, 30-35 parts per million of malic 3 phosphorus, you need to be applying P. And I think in certain situations, maybe where you have better soil health, higher organic matter, those types of things, you need to understand those microenvironments and how they work. And the only way to do that is by collecting data. The one cautionary tale that I will say about data is be careful who you share it with. There was I do mention something about that at the end. Because there was by uploading, inputting, transmitting, storing, otherwise making data or general data available to this platform, you agree that we may use, display, perform, reproduce, modify, and distribute such data or generated data in connection with the blank company or tool and without any compensation paid to you. So a lot of these companies, if you're not careful, and I won't mention who this is, I found this in their agreement, terms of agreement. It's like a 15-page document. This was one small little paragraph in there, and I was specifically went looking for it because I knew this was what they were going to say. They're basically taking your data, learning from you, and saying like, we don't care. We're gonna find something to create, build, and then charge you for it.
Yeah,
So you should be collecting data. Just be careful who you're sharing with, who you're giving permissions to, and find somebody that you trust to work with you on that data, because there is a lot of valuable information that you've collected. And make sure you calibrate your combine yield monitors. I can't stress that enough. I know it's a pain.
calibrate.
I know it's a pain in the butt. I know it takes time, but your combine monitor, if not calibrated, is only good to the scale. If you want to start analyzing spot by spot in the field, if you don't calibrate it, you can't do that. You might as well forget it. If you just care about going through the scale with it, then that's fine, but if you actually want to study your field, then it needs to be calibrated.
Why?
It's not accurate.
Isn't it just off by a percentage?
No. It's not linear, that's why, it's curve linear. So if most monitors. Oh, yeah. And this is a John McGuire question more than a question for me. But what happens is, this is what the graph looks like, and most, or something like that, it's curvilinear. What happens is most farmers cover it here, and maybe this is 100 bushel corn, and this is 250 bushel corn, and you might be accurate at 140 to 180, so anything outside of that, you gotta throw all those points out because they're not accurate.
What do you consider accurate?
Whatever your high, your mid and max yield is in the field that you're calibrated to. And so if you have a field and you've got 30,000 data points, you will only have to, when you go back and clean the data, so what we've found, if you only do this, if you have 30,000 data points, you're throwing out about 20,000 data points. Because all the data is falling outside of this. If you have 30,000 data points and you calibrate it here, you might throw out 500.
You still didn't answer the question. What is accurate? What percent?
I don't understand that.
Okay, we do post harvest calibration. When we try to get the accurate as we can when we start, but we always go back into post harvest. It's pretty easy to keep monitor within 3-4%.
Oh, then that's, if you calibrate it, you're within 3 or 4%.
Oh, I mean, I can tell it closer to that, but
No, that's
Did it
fine.
every day.
No, that's fine. I didn't understand your question. No, that's fine. 3 or 4%, 3 or 4% on 140 bushel, you're talking plus or minus, what, 6-7 bushel either, right? You know, that's pretty accurate. What you're after is, again, it goes back to another paper out there. If you go back and you have zones in your field, and you look at the zone in your field, and let's say, again, I'm just doing circles for whatever reason, but if you're 15%, if your variation is 15%, that's really good. And it should be 15% or less, and that's how you know you've got stable zones and stable yield. So if you're within that, then you can actually do something with the data, the information. But if you're doing this and you can't get out here, it's what I hear is you're calibrating and then you're just going back and correcting anything. And that's not a big deal.
But you've got two elements of calibration, like the mass and the moisture.
Speed, drive, temperature. Yeah, temperature is another one. Gotta make sure
So
The temperature
yeah, all of this comes, yeah. So, yeah.
you would think after how many years of yield monitors, they would come up with a better way that it's like quicker and more accurate and like you would think they'd be able to have all those technology cameras and everything else that do a better way, and that would be much quicker than what they do have, but it's just not yet. I've actually sat and pondered that for a very long time, so there's gotta be a better way. So.
Yeah, I'll tell you what don't we grab, I think Amy's back, so I think we can grab some food and you want to just, have some, just a little more discussion while we're eating. That's all right. I read that. Okay, thank you for coming, Chris. If you don't mind, let me, share a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this food. We thank you for this gathering and the information that was shared. Hopefully it'll help us in our operations and we can do to be better overall. Lord, we ask for your watchful guidance over us over the rest of this day, the rest of this week. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Okay, I think the food's right outside, right up.
I've got a question. The planning thing, we had a customer call yesterday, he said they sprayed not 1 gallon per 28, but the herbicide, it's like water, looks like it may not be until Saturday, plan.
Really see it from the
So
solar.
hey, smart rules, like we're thinking about switching back, like numbers would be, so they probably.
So finish your.
I would say, I know it's really like back and forth, and I don't know. Just because the inoculation process happened just because like. Yeah, no, it's, well, they don't find it.
You got some high yield got things.
So you may for that.
Pull it up and
I would make. Yeah, that's a good one for it.
It's what he-
I'm thinking kind of lazy because.
I was like, everyone's gonna say they're lazy, and like, it's actually the, smart. They're gonna use what's most efficient.
That is a better term.
So I was like,
Because why, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? They're trading sugar for nitrogen, and so I don't have to trade energy for nitrogen.
it's efficient.
Yeah, it's more efficient.
With that delay, inoculation, he's like, what if it gets, 6 weeks down the road?
But again,
Time drive.
and do they apply it?
How much?
When?
2 or 3 weeks ago. I used to stabilize it straight up. I was like, if you would have done 200 pounds of that or something, there's 36 pounds of.
They're probably even like this, like what, half of that is, half of it's usually, quarter of it is ammonium nitrate, or the other half is ammonium nitrate. That ammonia, they're probably just uses some of the other urea, so only half of it's probably sitting in there, the other half is probably, the nitrate's probably leached down. That ammonia portion is probably went to nitrate, it's probably down, you're only dealing with probably like half the amount of nitrogen, anyway, sitting in a.
Right. It's a lot of it, some of it's pond, I mean, you got pond food, you got some heavier. I was like, I don't, so we'll ask somebody, but I don't see what it
Your
is.
plant will be more efficient, you're probably going.
So is your crop in the ground?
Yeah, I mean, right.
I was like, I think it's too early, and he's just sitting in my cab yesterday, thinking.
2 to 3 weeks, it was like, you said like 3 to 8 years ago. But they're probably not saying. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to corn beans every year, most times you're putting the inoculant on, but I would essentially.
But I was gonna ask you earlier, and then I remember recording, so I'll maybe listen to it.
Let me stop that.